Hi everyone, this mini lecture is one that I'm calling So What? It has to do with trying to convince a prospective reader at the beginning of a piece of writing you're doing in an academic or in a professional setting that what you wrote down is actually worth reading. And what you see here in the middle of this page is that I've made a little chart with context, audience, and purpose here to explain three contexts that you will very likely run into throughout your college career and maybe if you go on into graduate or professional school. The first context is one you're in right now, first year writing. I put first year in the scare quotes to show you that I know that a number of you are not necessarily first year students, but teachers tend to call a course like 1010 or 2010 first year writing. So in that context, you know and I know quite clearly that your audience is the instructor or the professor, though you and your professor will very often play the role of an extracurricular audience and an extracurricular writer. And the purpose is really to meet the immediate assignment. I know that in this course and in 2010 you will encounter a number of assignments that ask you to imagine different rhetorical roles. And you should do that. You should try as best you can to try to imagine those roles, to try to imagine that you are a stakeholder in a situation outside of the academy, and that your prospective readers are people other than your instructor or your professor. But really, you and I both know that ultimately the purpose behind a first year writing course assignment is to meet the immediate assignment. But I'll talk more about that in just a minute. In other courses you'll take, upper division writing courses, so the CW designated courses, or even if you don't take a designated CW or communication and writing course that actually satisfies that requirement for graduation, you'll probably be taking a number of courses in your majors that do involve a fair amount of writing. In that case, the audience starts to get a little bit more complicated. Yes, you're definitely writing for an instructor or your professor, but you're also beginning to learn how to write for a scholarly or a professional community, and that changes things a little bit. It turns the situation of your first year writing course into a little bit more of a hybrid situation. So the purpose in those contexts is really not only to meet the assignment, but also to show awareness of a conversation, and I'm using that as a metaphor to describe the academic or the professional context in which you're supposed to be, that you are supposed to be writing yourself into as an apprentice member. So part of the point behind getting you to do the assignment that you're doing right now about identifying literacy practices in the academic community of your major is to get you aware of exactly that conversation. You're not really a full-fledged member of it yet at that point, but you need to show that you're aware that there is a conversation that exists and that there's a reason to write something in that discipline other than just you happen to find it interesting. And then by the time you get to graduate or professional school, your audience is really starting to shift even more. Yes, you may still be writing for an immediate grade from a professor, but really you're writing for a professional or a scholarly community. So for example, when I entered graduate school, yeah, I was writing for a grade. I was writing for a graduate seminar I was taking. But really what I was aiming for was doing the kind of writing that could get published in a journal that would be recognized by other people in my field. And so the purpose behind that is to act as an apprentice, to act as someone who was really becoming a full-fledged member of the field. There were times when I didn't feel fully confident doing that. So as G told us earlier in the semester, I kind of had to fake it until I made it. And one of the ways I did that was to try to indicate why, to answer the so what question, to try to indicate to someone why he or she would want to bother to read my writing. So as you get higher into academic writing, what you will probably notice is that there is more and more of a need to answer that so what question. That right now, or in 2010 for that matter, it's fine if you choose something and you're just interested in it and you think there may be reasons why other people might be interested in it. But as you get into higher level academic writing, you're really going to need to take that so what question seriously. Why would someone bother to read this? So here are some strategies involved. Here are some ways to try to answer that so what question. In a first year writing course, what I'm showing you here is an example that shows a basic strategy. And let me skip down here. You see the little asterisks that I put right here? My computer's a little bit laggy, but it's doing the best it can. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine and a lot of other first year writing instructors. Try to get away from, if you already do this, I don't know that many of you do this, but try to get away from this pattern of beginning a paper that you write in a course by writing something like, for my paper I decided to focus on one of these topics. I know that you're writing a paper. I know that you're focusing on a topic. If you weren't focusing on a topic, then you wouldn't bother to be writing the paper in the first place. So just go ahead and start. And here's a way to do that. Like, imagine that this is the opening paragraph or so of a paper that I'm writing in a first-year writing class about air quality in Salt Lake. So, starting right here where the, hello, right here. Many people complain, get away from that. Go away. Thank you. Many people complain and even joke about Salt Lake City's winter air quality, which throws a brownish-yellow blanket over the valley for days on end. But, and this is where the so what question starts, apart from its sheer ugliness, the air has significant and worsening health impacts. Increasing rates of childhood asthma are only part of the picture. Brian Munch, local anesthesiologist and president of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, claims that for every pregnant woman breathing this stuff, there is a threat to her fetus through chromosome damage. So what I've done here is a couple of things to try to answer the so what question. First of all, I started with something people kind of already know. We know that a lot of people complain and maybe even make jokes about Salt Lake City's air quality, but it's a bigger problem than that. And that's where the next sentence is. In other words, that's why you, my prospective reader, should care. And then I even go on further to give you a compelling quote from a credible local official. In this case, a doctor and president of this organization that is increasingly visible about Utah's air quality. So those are a couple of specific ways to answer the so what question. Scroll down here. My computer's kind of laggy. As you get into an upper division writing course, as I said, your audience and your purpose kind of gets hybridized. So the so what question really involves making an appeal to an educated lay audience. That is to say, an audience of people who are pretty well educated or are pretty on the level for the reading level that you're trying to hit, but aren't necessarily subject matter experts in your field. So you want to be able to make the case that what you and other members of your field are doing is relevant to a broader audience. Now, I'm not going to read this to you, because I just did that up above and it felt a little bit boring. And I know you guys are fresh back from the break and you're probably ready to go on with your summer at this point, so I don't want to bore you any more than I absolutely have to. But what I think you will see when you read this is what I'm trying to do is make a connection between this statement about colleges and how they are awarding financial aid, and I'm trying to make a connection between that and some broader question. So you see down here, here's where I try to do that, and I use the time-honored technique of mentioning what happens on the one hand and mentioning what happens on the other hand. So on one hand, the shift from one model of financial aid to another, again, I'll let you pause this if you want and read that, seems to open a door to more efficient instruction, but less quantifiable kinds of study and work such as writing may benefit from less efficiency, not more. And so what I'm kind of trying to do is indicate to an audience of educated lay people who are not themselves education professionals that it's really important, it's really necessary for them to pay attention to this issue. And then down here, graduate or professional school writing, it actually gets a little bit less important to make an appeal to an audience of educated laypersons. In fact, what you might find yourself writing about if you get into graduate or professional school or choose to go that route is you might find yourself writing about stuff that doesn't really have an immediate impact. It's not to say it's not important. It's just to say that the so what question that you need to ask yourselves takes on a kind of a different tenor. You're more interested in answering the so what question for fellow scholars, okay? So again, I'm not going to read this. And in fact, if you read it, there's probably some stuff here, even though you've read the article by Minjun Liu that you just summarized, that you're probably not going to get. But what I'm trying to do here, I think what you will notice is maybe a couple of moves. Recent scholarship does this, so I'm trying to indicate I did my homework. And then right about here, you see, while many of these claims are compelling, I argue that. And so what I'm trying to say is, okay, here you see a lot of citations of people in the field who are saying one thing. But down here, what I'm saying is something different. And so for a lot of people who are in a scholarly audience, just that is really compelling. Oh, all of these people are saying one thing, but the person who is writing this article is actually arguing against them. And that in and of itself might be a reason to go ahead and you know, keep reading. So that's a way that in a lot of scholarly conversations we answer the so what question. Here is an example of an article. This one's from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Now, the examples that I just gave you, imagine that the writer is answering the so what question at the very beginning of the article, the very beginning of the paper, depending on what you're writing. And very often that's the case, but not always. I think what you'll notice if you read this article, and you can see there's the URL right there if you want to go to it. This is an article about how colleges are changing the way they provide student financial aid. So right now, as it is, colleges can apply to, I guess, grant financial aid not on the basis of just having students enroll in a course and sit there for 3 hours a week throughout the semester, which is the traditional way of doing things. Colleges now have the ability to award financial aid based on competencies. And so if you show up in Writing 1010 and you say, you know what, I know how to do everything in this course, give me the test or whatever, or tell me how I can demonstrate my competency, and if I'm able to do that, I should be able to get financial aid and I should be able to pay you for the course without ever having to sit in the course. So that's a pretty substantial change. This is the Chronicle of Higher Education, and so what it wants to do is try to answer the so what question. Why should people be at all interested in this? Now you can imagine that the Chronicle of Higher Education, as the name implies, is written for higher educators, people like me, college professors and administrators. So how does it address the so what question? Well, it starts with pretty general reporting. Colleges can now do this. The U.S. Education Department sent a letter. Let's see. At first glance, the letter does not seem all that remarkable. Here's where people might start to think, well, so what? How does this affect me? And the writer of the article very intelligently addresses that. It's not a big deal. Simply confirms that colleges may apply for aid under this provision. But if you skip down here, you begin to see that the writer clarifies what that does. And it actually kind of comes to a head right here in this quotation. It, that is the policy change, moves away from time as a proxy for learning, and that is key. So what that means, if you're in the audience of people who this is written for, you read that as, oh wow, what that means is that we no longer have to just provide financial aid on the basis of how much time students spend in a course. So that's really where the so what question is answered. So it's not really answered at the very beginning. The answer to the so what question, what I want this example to show you, is that the answer to this so what question may actually be sprinkled throughout the piece of writing you're looking at, or throughout the writing that you're doing. It's conventional to try to answer it in the introduction. Kind of makes sense, right? Because you want people to get interested in what you're writing really fast. But it doesn't necessarily have to occur there. So, okay, what I've done is I have shown you some examples of a couple of ways in which writers might answer the so what question. Here's what I want you to do for the mini assignment that goes with the mini lecture. I want you to find a piece of writing from outside of this class. Any piece of writing will do. It could be an academic piece of writing, could be a piece of writing you find online or in a newspaper. And I want you to identify how the piece of writing attempts to answer the so what question for itself. I'm going to create a Dropbox for this mini lecture on Canvas. You don't need to upload anything. All I will ask you to do is describe what the piece of writing is, tell me where you got it, and explain to me how the piece of writing answers the so what question. And I'll try to bring in maybe an example or two on Thursday as well. So thanks very much. I'll see you in